nirasya sarva sandeham akikritya sudarshanam prakashita rahasyam tam bhajami gurumishwaram. Itam Shri Radhika Prana Natha Pada Sarojayo Yena Premanubhutyasha Dattam Tam Shri Gurum Bhaje. Shri Govinda Pararavinda Marupananya Bilashojitan Purna Prema Rasotsavo Jalamano Vritti Prasannananan Shajvad Krishna Katha Mahamrita Payora Shomura Kelato Bande Bhagavatani Mananudavam Murdna Nipatyakshito. Nama Shri Guru Krishnaya Nirupadi Kripa Krite Ya Shri Chaitanya Rupa Bhutanvan Prema Rasam Kalo Jayatam Surato Pangor Mama Mandamater Gati Matsarvasva Parampojo Radha Madana Mohano Adanastrinam Dantoir Yacheham Puna Puna Srimad Rupa Parampojo Dhulisyam Janma Janmani Raganugami Bhajano Lasamanasanam Shri Radhaya Sahasara Smaratam Brajandhum Shri Rupa Parakamala Shrita Chetasame Chittam Satam Marukari Yatupada Padme Abhirapali Patiputra Kanta Dasya Bilashati Balashpavara Shri Rupa Chintamala Sapti Sangsto Turdhantamatsvanta Haichurastam. I hear some little bit of sound in the background. If someone has their mic on, maybe it could be muted. Sorry. Bhaktir ya nikilarta varga janani ya brahma sakshat kriter anandatishaya prada visayajat sukyat vimuktir yaya. Shri Radha Ramana Parambuja Yugam Yasya Mahanashrayo Yakur Yadbraja Lokavad Gurutara Premnaiva Tasyai Nama Yaram Yanikila Ghashanga Shamani Shrutratritim Sangata Yasvadya Rasikai Sukabdi Janani Dhikarya Mukti Spriham Yadhata Hridaye Vrajendra Tanuja Premamrita Syandini Saji Yadhari Bhakta Vrinda Mohita Dhanyeha Padyavali. By the grace of Sri Kali Yuga Pavana, the Svabhajana Vibhajana, Prayojana Prima Purushottam, Karuna Mahasagar Shri Gauranga Mahaprabhu, and his beloved Parshad, the crest jewel of Gaudiya Vaishnavacharyas, the fulfiller of his heart's desire on this earth, Sri Rupa Goswami Pad. Again, today we'll continue our discussion of Padyavali. And today we begin a new section, that of the Sotsukya Prarthana, or prayers full of eagerness. So in our last reading we concluded the section on Bhaktas Nishta, and in particular there was a focus at the end on Nishta in the form of a one-pointedness of desire upon Bhagavan. So that is a very central topic, and we'll return to that topic at the end of this section when we come to Mahaprabhu, the fourth verse of Mahaprabhu's Shikshastakam. But in the meantime, we'll hear a number of very charming prayers expressive of eagerness. So first of all, what do we mean by eagerness? That will clarify. Having thus cited numerous verses illustrating Bhaktas' fixity or nishta, the compiler next starts a section on Bhaktas' prayers full of eagerness. In this regard, the commentator refers to Sri Jivapad's explanation of the compiler's definition of the characteristic of, quote, eagerness or autsukya, given in Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, as a feeling of being unable to pass time because of an intense desire, such as the intense desire to attain the sight of one's Ishtadevata. So, autsukya is the term that Rupa Goswami has here in this text, and which is also found in the Sindhu. So, in the commentary on the Sindhu, then this idea of eagerness is explained to mean being unable to pass the time. So, obviously, this is what's called a ceto'stu lakshana, or a definition by means of a ceto'stu lakshana. Eagerness is not principally being able to pass the time, unable to pass the time, but this is the effect of the presence of eagerness. So, some worldly parallel might be, at least in in modern consumer culture, young children on Christmas Eve or the night before their birthday, when they're anticipating getting new presents in the morning the next day, sometimes they can hardly sleep the night before. They can't, it's so difficult to pass the time. The night before Christmas is a long, long night because they can't sleep because they're so eager to get their presents in the morning. This is some example of an instance of, when someone has a desire for a particular object, which is very great, then the effect of that is this feeling of eagerness, which results in time being felt to pass slowly, or it being felt to be difficult to pass the time in a normal way. So sometimes they say that time passes fast when you're happy and slow when you're sad. But in this case, such a state of eagerness is both joyful and sorrowful, or it's this extraordinary blending of the two, which is deeply characteristic of the nature of prema and the nature of life in Braja, if you will. As Sanatana Goswami says, sometimes the residents of Braja, they're undecided whether this thing called love for Krishna is nectar or poison, whether it's joyful or sorrowful, whether it's troubling or comforting. It's hard to tell, insofar as it's this extraordinarily intense blending of the two. So, in that sense, this feeling of being unable to pass the time carries elements of both, if you will. So we'll look at how various poets have depicted this. So the first, so Tesham eva sotsukya prarthana, their prayers full of eagerness. Nanda-nandana-padāravindayoḥ, syandamāna-makaranda-bindavaḥ, sindhavaḥ parama-saukhya-sampadāṁ, nandayantu hṛdayaṁ mamāniśam. May the drops of nectar oozing out from the lotus of the Son of Nanda's feet, oceans of the splendors of the highest bliss, constantly delight my heart. So the last word of the second line, bindava, rhymes and also, you could say, is a metaphor of contrast with the first word of the following line, sindhavaḥ. So bindava is the plural of bindu for drops, and sindhava is the plural for sindhu of oceans. So he's saying that these bindus are sindhus, or this bindava is sindhava. These drops are oceans. So as though to convey, even slight experience of this nectar coming from Krishna is comparable to something oceanic or vast. So then when the prospect of not just a drop of that experience, but an eternity of that experience is put forward, then what to compare it to? Oh wait, there's nothing to compare it to in this world. It's that wonderful. So this is one way to take out the implied sense, but we'll look at some other additional points as follows. The drops of nectar emanating from the lotus of Sri Krishna's feet that are described by the author in this verse as oceans of the splendors of the highest bliss are a reference to bhakti rasas. The compiler begins his Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu by describing Swayam Bhagavan Sri Krishna as the, quote, embodiment of the nectar of all rasas, or the Akila Rasamrita Murti, and later defines rasa as follows. This rati for Krishna, the sthayi bhava, brought into the state of relishability in the heart of bhaktas by vibhavas, anubhavas, sattvika bhavas, and vyabhichari bhavas, through hearing and so forth, shall become bhakti rasa. So we're not going to launch into a discussion of the details of rasa tattva, but simply I'm giving the definition here because the commentator says that these drops of nectar are drops of bhakti rasa. So in essence, this is what bhakti rasa is. And the following is also relevant. The author's prayer in the verse under discussion is thus a prayer with eagerness to experience bhakti rasa. The requisites for experience of bhakti rasa to come about are explained by the compiler in the following passage from Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, and the author's prayer can accordingly be understood to amount to a prayer for these requisites along with their outcome. So to say that I pray to drink these drops of nectar coming from Krishna's feet, what does that really mean? What, in the view of Rupa Goswami, does that entail? It entails everything that's required to actually experience rasa as he defines it. So, these verses that shortly follow the definition of rasa in the beginning of the southern division of the Sindhu, which are also cited by Mahaprabhu in his teachings to Sanatana Goswami, are extremely important and summarize what is all the requisites for experience of such rasa. So, this verse, Bhakti nirdutta doshanam prasannato jalachetasam Sri Bhagavata Raktanam Rasika Sangaranginam Jivani Bhutta Govinda Pada Bhakti Sukha Shriyam Premantaranga Bhutani Krityanye Vanutishti Tatam Bhaktanam Hridi Rajanti Samskara Yugalojvala Ratirananda Rupaiva Niyamana Turasyatam Krishnadibhir Vibhavyadyair Gotter Anubhavadhvani Prodhananda Chamatkara Kashtam Apadyate Param. In the hearts of bhaktas who have been purified by bhakti of all faults, such as attachment, aversion, delusion, and so on. So first of all, if you want to experience bhakti rasa, you're going to have to undergo the process of being purged of all faults. Second, whose hearts are clear, which is explained to mean fit for the manifestation of higher pure existence, or Shuddha Sattva Vishesh. In other words, a download of the Chit Shakti. And bright, that is all-knowing by virtue of this manifestation. As it's explained earlier in the Sindhu, it's actually rati itself that causes one to experience Krishna. And the Chit Shakti, which is what rati is constituted of, also assumes the form of one's thoughts within one's mind, such that one experiences one's thoughts to be as though they were always one's own thoughts, but yet those thoughts are actually now completely guided by Bhagavan's Sarup Shakti, rather than being constituted merely of elements of the Maya Shakti. And then that agency of the Sarup Shakti illuminates Krishna and causes the person to experience Krishna and gives them the impression that their own mind and senses are perceiving Krishna the way the mind and senses perceive things of this world, even though it's actually that agency of the Chit Shakti which is making it happen. So this is a verse we've discussed elsewhere here in Padyavali, and is found in the 3rd chapter of the Sindhu. So that's what's alluded to, or because here this is later in the Sindhu, he's pointing back to that and saying that thus their hearts or their mind is bright. So just by saying bright, that's what he means. By brightness, he means illuminated by that potency, this Shuddha Sattva Vishesh. So when all faults are gone, when there is clarity, and when there is that illuminating brightness of that presence of the Chit Shakti, these are 3 points made so far, and moreover, these persons are who cherish relishing Srimad Bhagavatam, who rejoice in the company of relishers of rasa, whose life is the wealth of the bliss of bhakti to the feet of Govinda, and who engage in all of prema's natural activities, that is, acts of hearing about Krishna, praising him, and so on. In other words, actions that are anubhavas, or expressions of from the heart of prema. So in the hearts of those bhaktas, rati, which is bliss itself, appears bright as a result of the 2 types of samskaras. So Jiva Goswami explains, this means the samskaras created in one's present life by one's bhakti sadhana, and by samskaras created in a past life. The implication being that no one will ever reach the state of actually experiencing bhakti rasa within only one lifetime, or rather it's those who in a past life have already had the psyche, the soil prepared, so to speak, and then in a subsequent lifetime further the cultivation, if you will, that those persons can have this experience. So in that person, when rati descends into the psyche of this person who has a samskar for bhakti in the present and the past life, then that rati reaches the state of being relishable, that is, of being rasa, on the pathway of perception, on account of present vibhavas and so forth, such as Krishna. In other words, as soon as they experience the other ingredients of rasa, and reaches the highest pinnacle of intense bliss and wonder. So rasasara chamatkar, since wonder is the essence of rasa and bliss is its primary effect, then he says that those experience bhakti rasa experience the highest pinnacle of intense bliss and wonder. So, in our verse of discussion, the author is saying, may the drops of nectar oozing out from the lotus of the Son of Nanda's feet constantly delight my heart. In other words, that pinnacle of the highest bliss and wonder, may I experience that, and not all the even pleasures and splendors of mundanity, but specifically that, the nectar of bhakti rasa. This is how the author here is expressing his eagerness. So, there's a few verses of similar type Next, the compiler cites a prayer full of eagerness for absorption in loving remembrance and discussion of Sri Krishna. Iha vatsān samacārayad, iha na Svāmī jagau vaṁśīm, iti sāsraṁ gadato me yamunā-tīre dinaṁ yāyāt. Raghupati Upadhyaya. Here he would herd the calves. Here our Swāmī would play the flute. Let my day pass on the bank of the Yamuna, speaking in this way, in tears. I'll read it one more time. Here he would herd the calves. Here our Swāmī would play the flute. Let my day pass on the bank of the Yamuna, speaking in this way, in tears. So our Swāmī refers to Sri Krishna. As was discussed earlier, in the commentary on Srimad Mahaprabhu's celebrated verse, Trinadapi Sunichena, cited here in Padyavali 32, specifically in regard to the quality of being lower than even grass, or Trinadapi Sunichata, it is explained in Brihad Bhagavatamrita that Gopakumar finally attained his Ishtadevata Sri Krishna in Vraja after engaging in sadhana in accord with the ultimate instructions he received from Sri Narada and Uddhava in Dwaraka. So this is a topic that we covered somewhat, but because this verse of Raghupati Upadhyaya matches so perfectly with what is taught in the Brihad Bhagavatamrita, I think it's well worth revisiting this. So the context, just for reference or for recollection, is that Gopakumar, after his long journey through so many lokas, comes to Dwaraka and there has a private meeting with Uddhava and Narada, and finally there they speak to him directly about Braja and the glory of Braja, the speciality of Braja, and speak to him so as to guide him how at last he can reach there, and what sadhana specifically is attuned or is apt to reach Braja. What is the exact, most calibrated sadhana that will lead to attainment of it? So in that final portion of chapter 5 of the second canto of the Bhagavatamrita, then these points come out, which are Sanatana Goswami's way of encapsulating in essence what is the ideal form of sadhana for a Gaudiya Vaishnava aspiring for their Ishtadevata, Sri Krishna of Brajadam. So if we look at the sadhana that he prescribes, and then we look at what Raghupati Upadhyaya has described, there's a direct match. So I've just cited a couple of the verses that talk about this. Quote, the verse is also good. Tadvai tasya priya kridavana bhumo sadaraha nivasangs tanuyadevam sampadye tachiradruvam. Always residing in seclusion in the land of his deer play forests, one should develop that. That is, one should expand that prema through engagement in sadhana. In this way, it certainly and without delay becomes manifest. So one footnote here on terminology verbally is that Sanatana Goswami he glosses this verb sampadāyat with the word tanuyat, with another verb tanuyat, which can mean a common sense of which is to expand or increase something. So as we've just discussed in the previous verse, if prema is something that descends into the citta by the agency of the chit shakti, then it's not really something that one can quote-unquote develop, insofar as it's not like, a painting that one can work on and, make bigger day by day. But nevertheless, we have to bear in mind that this is a verse of Sanatana Goswami, written in the Bhagavatamrita, which was written before the Sindhu, and in which Sanatana Goswami doesn't always use terms like prema in exactly the same way that Rupa Goswami uses them. And in this case, and in a few other places in the Bhagavatamrita, Sanatana Goswami also speaks of the word prema as being sadhana, rather than, or not exclusive to, but although we typically think, according to the line of thought in the Sindhu and the Sandarbhas, that prema is the sadhya, prema is the goal, prema is the thing to be achieved, and we're doing sadhana bhakti, the aim of which is bhava bhakti, which ultimately manifests as prema bhakti. This is the understanding we get from the Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu. But Sanatana Goswami, he speaks of prema also as the sadhana to reach Braja, or the sadhana to achieve the Ishta Devata. So, in his way of speaking, he's using the word prema in a way that, so to speak, arches over both of what Rupa Goswami calls sadhana bhakti and prema bhakti in the Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, insofar as his way of seeing it, or his way of describing it there, is that prema is, the primary element or the primary characteristic of the domain of Braj, and that prema is also the sadhana insofar as one's aspiration for that and the activities that are understood to both be expressions of that by those who have that, and which lead to the manifestation of that, or the intensification of that within the heart of the sadhaka, can also, in a sense, be spoken of with the word prema. So in that way, he does use this verb sampadya in the sense of vistarayat or tanuyat, in the sense of expand, because in this same section of the chapter, he does say that the sadhana to achieve braja is prema. So, do that. In other words, do this sadhana of prema. So here he's then saying, expand that or develop that. In other words, continue that so that it increases, so that it grows, such that it causes one to reach the Ishta Devata, reaches Krishna. Anyway, I don't mean to elaborate excessively, but just sometimes I find that's, what areas where we need to harmonize elements between the works of Rup, Sanatan, Raghunath, and Jiva. This is an area of discussion, so to speak, or I find that, teasing out the subtleties of how they use some of the same words in different contexts helps to grasp the gist of what they're saying. Anyway, so referring to our verse of discussion, here Sanatana Goswami is saying, residing in seclusion in Braja, one should cultivate, or one should engage in Shravan, Kirtan, these acts related to love of Krishna. And moreover, he says later, there, meaning in Gokula, humility and prema always arise within the sadhus, who see the forests such as Vrindavan, waters such as the Yamuna, mountains such as Govardhan, and so forth, as though vacant. Those sadhus whose mouths are filled with cries of ha, ha, and who are burned by intense sorrow at heart, as they search for their beloved Sri Krishna. So this abject state of humility and engagement in sadhana, in seclusion, in braja, in the spirit of that humility, is ultimately what our Uddhava and Narada prescribe for Gopakumar. So to see Vrindavan in the Yamuna to be, quote, as though vacant, and he of course says as though to imply that Krishna is always present there, but that for a sadhaka who's yet to reach that state of prema, he's perceived to be as though absent. And he also emphasizes that because earlier in this context there was a deliberation, as we discussed in connection to the Trinadapi Sunicina verse, that they didn't advise him to go to Puri, where Jagannath is available for darshan always, or where, so to speak, Krishna is visibly present. Rather, they considered it more advantageous to be in a place where Krishna is ostensibly absent, because it's in that absence, that eagerness, that this longing, that this humility can further mature or further intensify. So here Raghupati Upadhyay is saying, let my day pass on the bank of the Yamuna, saying here he would play the flute. So the implication of the poem is that he's perceiving Vrindavan to be as though without that presence of Krishna. He's seeing the Dham to be as though devoid of Krishna's presence, and then longing for Krishna in his absence. So precisely what this state of humility and this process of sadhana that's described, this verse of Raghupati Upadhyay vividly expresses that, or charmingly expresses that in a poetic way. And the following statement also further clarifies this. So after Gopakumar receives these advices, then he goes and applies them. So that's described as follows. So it says, Tam naradiyam anuśīlita-shikṣam Shri Krishna namani nija priyani Sankirtayan susvaramatra lilas Tasya pragayan anuchintayaṁ Tadya lilastala jatametad vilokayan Bhavadashe gatoje Tayo svichitte karanena lajje Katam parasmin Katayan yadham te Sada mahartya karunar swarai ridan Namami ratrir divasaṁ Navedmi yad suchirada nushtitam Sukhaya vatad tadutarti sindhave. Following the instructions of Narada, here in Braja, melodiously chanting names of Sri Krishna dear to myself. This is Gopakumar speaking in first person. Singing aloud of and meditating upon his leelas, and beholding the sights of his leelas to be as though vacant. This bhava and state which arose in me, I feel embarrassed just by thinking of them in my own heart. So how can I describe them to someone else? Crying continuously in pitiful tones, out of great distress, I spent nights and days disconcerted. I did not know whether all that I had practiced for so long would lead to joy or an ocean of distress. So in the verse under discussion, the author similarly perceives the bank of the Yamuna to be as though vacant, and prays with longing out of abject humility, not even to attain the sight of his Ishta Devata Sri Krishna. Oh gosh, the sight, wrong spelling. But just to remain ever engaged in vivid remembrance and discussion of him in Braja, even in the midst of his apparent absence. So, the spirit of Raghupati Upadhyay here can be seen as consistent with this this sense of arti, or this sense of heartache that's felt, and what occurs, or what is understood to occur, this oscillation between longing to see him and then again feeling it sufficient just to talk about him, just to remember him. So Raghupati Upadhyay's statement could be seen as a particular state in a wave of this sort of humility that's described here in the Bhagavatamrita, by him saying, let my day just pass, speaking about him in tears. Like, at least let me talk about him. The idea being not that he doesn't want to see him, like he wants to see him so bad that he's shattered by the fact that he can't. So then, to solace himself, he's saying, but at least I can carry on talking about him. Something like this. So in that way, conveying eagerness also with an acute sense of humility. Alright, then I'll come to the next one. Next, the compiler cites a prayer full of eagerness, wherein the author prays for his mind to remain ever absorbed in his Ishtadevata, Sri Krishna, as Sri Krishna beckons Sri Radha and her Sakhis for a tryst. Anuśīlita-kuñja-vāṭikāyāṁ jaghanālambita-pīta-śāṭikāyām muralī-kala-kūjite hṛdayaṁ ceto'stu kadamba-devatāyām. So there's an obvious repetition of kayam, kayam, tayam, tayam in the last lines of all the verses, of all the lines in the verse. And with that he says, may my mind be fixed upon he by whom an arbor cottage has been carefully prepared. He by whom a yellow cloth has been draped around the hips. He who is absorbed in cooing sweet melodies with his flute, the kadamba-devatāyām. I'll read it one more time. May my mind be fixed upon he by whom an arbor cottage has been carefully prepared. He by whom a yellow cloth has been draped around the hips. He who is absorbed in cooing sweet melodies with his flute, the kadamba-devatāyām. The author describes his Ishtadevata Sri Krishna as, quote, he by whom an arbor cottage, or kunja, vatika, has been carefully prepared, to indicate that Sri Krishna has aptly decorated and furnished an arbor cottage with all the desirable paraphernalia for a tryst. He further describes him as, quote, he by whom a yellow cloth has been draped around the hips, to allude to his attractive figure and dress, and as he who is absorbed in cooing sweet melodies with his flute, sorry, there's a typo, to convey that Sri Krishna is engaged in beckoning Sri Radha and her Sakhis for a tryst with a song from his flute. So he's got everything ready, he's dressed and appearing excellent, and now with everything set, now he's putting out the call and cooing a very sweet melody with his flute. So as such, lastly, the author describes Sri Krishna as, quote, the kadambas-devatāyām, to evoke contemplation of Sri Krishna's qualities of shining and playing, the two primary senses the root of the word devata, that is div, can convey. Sri Krishna is envisioned to shine by virtue of his attractive luster, and to epitomize play with his enchanting lila, as he stands poised beneath a kadamba tree near the arbor cottage he has prepared and plays the flute to beckon his beloveds. So often a kadamba tree is described as an ideal site because it can be large, create a great canopy, but it doesn't have such big roots. Then it's a place that can create an ideal shaded area and somewhat sheltered area, which is suitable for rasa dancing and other sort of play. So oftentimes it is said that Krishna's meetings with the gopis can take place at the base of a kadamba tree. So here, Krishna is standing at the base of a kadamba tree near the kunja that he has already, and he's playing the flute. So as such, he's shining and playing, or he's like a devata. A further suggested sense can be drawn from the prayer that the author longs to participate in this lila as a Sakhi of Sri Radha, and thus experience the ultimate spiritual fortune of responding to the call of Sri Krishna's flute and assisting Sri Radha in her tryst with Sri Krishna. So when the author is saying, may my mind be fixed upon the Kadamba's devata as he's playing the flute, shining in his yellow cloth with his kunja already, then that his mind may be fixed there is the suggested implication being, may I be carried away into that, or may I someday participate therein as well. So in this way, he conveys his eagerness and does so specifically in the context of Sri Krishna's lila and Madhura Rasa lila. All right, so I think I have one more. So next, the compiler cites a prayer full of eagerness for Sri Krishna to forever preside like an emperor over the heart. Arakta-dhirga-nayano nayanabhirama kandarpa-koti-lalitam vapurādadhāna bhuyat-samedya hṛdayaṁ buruhādivarti vrindatavi nagara chakravarti. May he of wide reddish eyes, he who is delightful to the eyes, he who bears a figure more charming than a crore of kandarpas, he who is the emperor of cultured lovers, in the town of Vrindavan, now be the presider over the lotus of my heart. May he of wide reddish eyes, he who is delightful to the eyes, he who bears a figure more charming than a crore of cupids, he who is the emperor of cultured lovers in the town of Vrindavan, now be the presider over the lotus of my heart. So the commentator takes the term, quote, cultured lover, or nagara, to refer to one who is artful, or vidagda. So the word nagara is derived from the word nagara, and there's a play upon that in the final line of the verse, where he's saying, Vrindatavi nagara nagara. So a nagara literally would convey one who's from the nagara. So a nagar means a town or a city. So a nagara would literally be an urbanite, or would be somewhat equivalent to a word we have in English, urbane, which can convey someone who's cultured, sophisticated, meaning just as the word urbane refers to someone who's of an urban area, or has been influenced significantly by urban living, meaning cultured, living among an advanced society. So also the term Nagara conveys or has, etymologically is a parallel being derived from the word Nagara. However, in Sanskrit, the Sanskrit context, unlike the word urbane and urban in English, the word Nagara can refer to both simply a citizen or a sophisticated or urbanized person, the way you can in English, but it also carries a connotation, or it has what they call a rudhyartha, or a conventional meaning, that refers to someone who's adept in affairs of love or who's inclined to engage in them. In some cases, the word Nagara can even mean, what sometimes they say in English, a man of the town, meaning, a person who pursues women throughout a town, so to speak. So these range of meanings all can be found in the word Nagara. So specifically, the commentator, to bring some precision or some clarity as to what the author of the verse has in mind, then he says here we'll take the word Nagara to mean vidagda, or artful. So what does the word vidagda mean? That's defined in the Sindhu as follows. Rupa Goswami writes, Kala vilas digdatma vidagdha iti kirtyate. That one whose mind is anointed with, meaning ever engaged, in the arts and play is called artful. So in other words, one who's both inclined to and expert at art and play is called vidagda. And there's a beautiful verse at the end of the Krishna Sandarbha where Jiva Goswami plays upon this definition of the word vidagda in describing Radha and Krishna. So here, Rupa Goswami also illustrates this Krishna's quality of being artful, or vidagda, with a verse as follows. Kitam gumfati tandavam khatayati brute praheli kramam Venum vadayate srajam virachaya tyalikyam abhyasyati nirmati swayamindra jala patalim dyute jayatyunmadan pashyudama kala vilasa vasatish chitram hari kridati. Look, he composes songs. He performs dances. He speaks series of riddles. He plays the flute. He strings garlands. He draws pictures. He personally creates magic tricks. He defeats the arrogant at dice. Meaning he, plays dice well. Hari, an abode of endless arts and play, sports wonderfully. So, you never know when, where, and how Krishna's going to come out with one sort of play, one sort of art or another. So, quote, he who is the emperor of cultured lovers in the town of Vrindavan suggests that Sri Krishna in his Leela in Vrindavan performs Leelas more wonderfully replete with arts and play than any other form of Sri Bhagavan in any of his other abodes, and that these arts and play are expressed to the greatest extent in the midst of his relishing of Madhura Rasa with the gopis led by Sri Radha. The prayer, may he be the presider over the lotus of my heart, can be understood to convey a suggested sense. Quote, as an emperor presides over a grand royal court seated upon a majestic throne, so may Sri Krishna, the emperor of cultured lovers in the town of Vrindavan, preside over this town of Vrindavan, seated on the lotus of my heart. That is, may he appear in my heart along with his abode of Vrindavan and all the extraordinary beauty, arts, and play found there alone, and forever bless me with the supreme spiritual fortune of perceiving and participating in his leelas with Sri Radha and her Sakhis there. So as an emperor surpasses so many other kings of smaller regions or, minor powers and so forth, then the poet is also saying here, Krishna is more charming than a crore of Kandarpas. Or, in the midst even of so many other apparently attractive persons, Krishna is like the emperor to whom they all bow. And you can find other verses where the cupids bow or the cupids faint in Krishna's presence. So the rest of the other elements in the verse support this, saying he has wide reddish eyes and who is delightful to the eyes, or he's called Nayanabhiram, which is also a name you'll hear sometimes for Vaishnavas. Nayanabhiram. So he's a delight to the eyes. He has beautiful wide reddish eyes. His figure is more beautiful than so many Kandarpas, and he's like an emperor in the midst of Vrindavan. So he wants that as an emperor rules over a throne in a kingdom with all of his splendor and magnificence, then let that Krishna rule over my heart. So in this way, he conveys his eagerness to receive that manifestation or that experience of Krishna within his heart. So I'll pause here for today. We've got 4 verses for today, so if anyone would like to share any comments, questions, corrections, or anything else, feel free to share. Yes, Vidyaji.
Dandavad pranam, Sri Radhe.
Jai Radhe, pranam.
Thank you so much. This is such a nice presentation, like all others do. What prompted me, last time I heard the last class, you quoted verse of a person, I'm not sure who was that, praying that, it's in Nishta chapter where a person's praying for just to have Krishna, you, Bhagavan. I want to have you, regardless of where I am, Vaikuntha and hell, in this condition, that condition. I just want to have you. And I heard this verse, and of course, we price this statement as, so high, so like, who will dare to do that, and think about it, it's like, wait a minute. Did Radharani pray to Krishna, or even Raghupati Bhajaya right now? He specifically asked see Krishna in Vrindavan, because Bhakti Rasa is there. The environment, it's very important where you have actually him. Him in hell, I don't see any Bhakti Rasa there, or any other condition. Specifically, to have him in Vrindavan is the aspiration and the only thing that the devotee wants. Not that, whatever you want, I'm just like, I want to have you, but whatever you put me, I'm fine. I don't find it satisfactory to me. And also siddhantically correct. I would say, sorry to say that, but it's a bold statement. But it's the glitch. I find it's like very cringy when I hear this. Oh, whatever you want, I'll just have you, and then you put me anywhere I want. Like, what? Why would you do that? This makes sense. Is it not? Tell me more about it.
It is.
Awkward.
The only thing I'll add is that, you can also interpret the two to be compatible. In other words, what we're describing here today, these type of verses where there's longing for Krishna and there's a specificity to that. There's a specificity to the dham that he's in, the lila he's engaged in, and so on. This is undoubtedly something that the Goswamis created, the structure for bhaktas to be able to learn about and cherish at heart. And this type of specificity is central to the path of sadhana that they've taught. And, we can say that thus when these other verses are stated that, the bhakta just sees the same object, whether they're in naraka or svarga or, wherever I may be, then we can also interpret those statements to say that physically I may be wherever I am, but mentally I'm only going to be one place, and that is the dham of my Ishtadevata. So, for example, this verse I've quoted a few times, bhave bhave hṛdaya bhavane bhavayam bhavantam, of Maharaj Kulashekar, where he says, birth after birth, let me only meditate upon you. But he says, hṛdaya bhavane, in this abode of my heart. Okay? So there's an interesting passage you probably recall in the Bhakti Sandarbha, where Jiva Goswami specifically discusses the idea of meditating on Krishna as present in the heart. And he says that that is to be done by yogis, but not by bhaktas. In the sense that they don't literally meditate on Bhagavan as being in the heart, but rather in the heart, they meditate on Bhagavan being in his dham. So Jiva Goswami specifically explains that no bhakta will meditate on the Ishtadevata outside of his dham, because the Ishtadeva doesn't exist outside of his dham. That's where he exists.
Exactly.
So there's in one sense, there's no such thing as meditation on him outside of his dham, because that's just an imagination in your head. It's not like he exists anywhere else. So therefore, in these other statements in the Bhagavatam, or more in general, where we hear this idea of, I just want to remember you within my heart, or I just want to always, think of you wherever I am, then we can also say that the sadhaka is ready for undergoing whatever karma they may need to in the external sense, but that coupled with that, there will be awareness of, there will be attentiveness to, in their heart space, or their mental space, so to speak, of meditation upon the Ishtadevata within the context of his dham, the companionship of his primary parikaras, and so forth. So, in that way, we can, so to speak, slide some of those other expressions in with these points. In other words, what those other poets had in mind, what some statements in the Bhagavatam, you could take them either way, but there is a way to read them where these two elements can keep you from cringing.
Because see, the aim is bhakti rasa, and also this prompts me to question this unmotivated devotion, because jiva is motivated by rasa, is it not? Either material rasa or topmost rasa, in everything in between. Jiva drives for ananda, Jiva drives for atma, drives into tasting the rasa. That's the objective of existence, really. And because Krishna is the source of all rasas and his topmost rasaraj, then obviously one would aspire to be part of that experience. Not just, whatever happens, I'm just so detached or whatever, I don't find it rasic, Anyway, just a side thought. Like even in what, this is Madhava, where or one of the books of Rupa Goswami, the dramas, the plays he wrote, Krishna in Dvaraka is looking at a picture of Krishna in Braj. He's, hankering to be there, Even that is huge distinction between Dvaraka. Huge distinction. Right? It's not the same place at all. Anyway.
Yeah, nice. Well, thank you for sharing. The only other thing that comes to mind in that regard is that in some cases also, some of those statements where Bhaktas say, wherever I am or however long I remain in this world, those can also be conceived as not necessarily principal expressions of their aspiration, but secondary expressions that arise from humility. In other words, the bhakta aspires for the seva of their Ishta Devata in the Ishta Devata's dham because there's nothing more pleasing to the Ishta Devata than the seva rendered to him by those who are most pleasing to him. In other words, nothing using mundane things is ever going to be as pleasing to Krishna as all the dearmost accoutrements of Braj are to him. So it's not even if we say the aim is to please Krishna, still, therefore, the aspiration is to serve him as one of his parikaras with the bhav, the form, the etc. of that domain, because that's what's most pleasing to him. Those are the things that are known and understood to be the way that he experiences the greatest satisfaction. So one is aspiring to those things because those are the means to do the greatest service for him. So then, with that point in place, if we consider that the bhakta aspires for these things, then there can be, in the course of their own practice, a instance or a cause, whatever it may be, where in the spirit of humility, when their attention is drawn to shortcomings within themselves, mistakes they've made, faults that persist, what have you, and they feel themselves to be unworthy of or still beset with disqualifications for all of those desired for things, then in that context, sometimes they may say, well, let me at least carry on always thinking of him here in this world, or, these type of statements. So it's if we interpret those statements to be the essence of their aspiration rather than a particular, you can say, secondary expression of it brought about by a certain state of reflection, then we can, so to speak, not catch the full wave of it, if you will. Because there's, for example, a verse of Rupa Goswami, a beautiful verse, where he even in some cases admonishes himself for praying to attain prema. I'm trying to remember the verse now. It's Bhuyat Janmani Janmani. Oh. Gosh, it doesn't. Prarthanam Saha. Sorry, it doesn't come to my mind. But he says that this prema, experiencing just a tiny fraction of which even Atmaramas who are completely absorbed in the Ananda of Brahman instantaneously become disinterested in that, meaning in that bliss of Brahman. How audacious is it of me to pray for that prema? Who am I to pray for this thing that is like ecstatically astonishing even to the most extreme disciplined cultured sages? So then he says, but at least if birth after birth desire for that could pervade my heart. So if we look at it in that context, or as a particular expression that comes up as a sub-aspect or in the course of a flow or a cycle or oscillations of attention and reflection, then we can see how these two things can both come out from the heart of the same bhakta, or the heart of a bhakta with that clarity of aspiration as well.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway,
So-
that's
so-
just
so-
what reminds me of.
Yeah, thank you. So it seems like not, so those are how call it, sporadic expressions as they feel. They write down those expressions, not all of them necessarily are sedantically correct. Can you say that? They express something of their own at the moment, showing some aspect of the humility, but not really. It's not like a statement that Shastra would just say out loud. Would it be?
I don't know if I'd say it like that. I mean, definitely our texts describe all of the different anubhavas, all of the different vyabhachari bhavas that arise in the heart of a bhakta, such as humility, such as otsukya, such as these things we're describing. So there's definitely, a framework in which we can place these different statements and understand what are the underlying causes or what are the underlying psychological dynamics of these things arising. And if we study the Sindhu and as the path is laid out, then we can easily or relatively easily identify what is something that might be like a standard expression of the principal attitude of the bhakta, and what is an expression of a bhakta that is related to a particular vyabhachari bhava, or related to a particular anubhava, or that is specific to a particular context in which something took place. So if we look at it from that perspective, it wouldn't seem that we would need to label these things, quote, against Siddhanta. The Siddhanta is there to serve our adoration of those bhavas, more so than those prayers need to conform to our theory. You know what I mean? Like, the theory needs to accommodate the humility and all the range of experiences that these bhaktas have. So it's more that someone might acquire a siddhantically inaccurate understanding if they take a particular prayer that's expressed in relation to a particular sanchari bhava and then mistake that to be a principal characteristic of a sthayi bhava, let's say.
Exactly, got it.
Then the person is putting central what is actually only conditional, or what is actually only peripheral.
Right.
And like we talked about earlier in the humility section, when we analyzed some of those prayers of Prahlad Maharaj, where he appears to, critically speaking, contradict himself by saying, one hand, I'm afraid of material existence, and then verses later saying, I'm not afraid of anything. And then Jiva Goswami gave that comment, Bhavanam vichitra gati tvat, that how is it that Prahlad is in one sense saying he's not afraid, and then another place saying he is afraid? He says, this is because of the wonderful movement of bhavas. In other words, it's a flow, and according to what the person is attentive to at a given time and what they're contemplating at a given moment, then they're going to say things that aren't meant to be taken as absolute generalizations.
So basically, this is the Rasa Tattva will explain these things, because Vyabhichari Bhavas are transitory. We know that it's just, they appear and go like waves in the ocean, right?
Exactly.
But Sthayi Bhava is just like horizon, always there. It's never changing. So those Vyabhichari Bhavas, transitory Bhavas, they can come and go, and maybe somewhat contradictory to the main mood of a Vaishnava. Is that right?
Of course. I mean, dainya is classified as one such bhava. So what a bhakta may say in the spirit of dainya is different than what they may say in the spirit of, otsukya or of another type of...
Right. Okay.
And, just like in our life, sometimes you ask someone, how you doing? And they say, oh, I'm great. And then you might talk to them and say, how you doing? Oh man, I'm so depressed. It's like they might say the same two things on the same day, depending on who asked and what the context is and whether they felt like talking about some deep feeling or whether they were just trying to be polite and didn't want to get into it, or, just like in ordinary life, people can, so to speak, express even their own selves and their own feelings in very different ways in different contexts. And it's not that they're not a coherent individual or that what they're saying isn't true. It's just that the way that they chose to express themselves and the aspect of their feelings that they had chose to give attention to or expression of is not always identical.
Okay. Thank you. That explains a lot. Thank you.
Pranam. All right, well, I think we can conclude here for the evening, and if we're so blessed, we'll dive further into these charming expressions of eagerness, prayers of eagerness in our next reading. And in the meantime, may some of these images evoked in these verses stay with you in your heart and mind. Vaishnavebhyo namo namo. Jai Shri Guru, Jai Shri Gaur, Jai Jai Shri Shri Radhe Shyam.
Jai Shri Radhe Shyam. Pranam.